Hey, this is Grant Iler from Hammer and Hand Custom Cycles. On this episode, we're going to be taking a Baker RSD 5-speed tranny with standard gear ratio. We're going to be installing it into Doug Beagle's beautiful 2005 custom softail. Alright, first we're going to take off the foot controls and the footboard on the left side of the bike so we can get to the primary, because we're going to open her up. Some of anguish, some of glory, some of hatred, situations left ignored. Now we want to make sure to take off the primary chain inspection cover, because two of the bolts do run through into the inner primary. And once you get all the bolts off from around the primary, you want to make sure that you get an oil pan underneath the primary, because even though you drain it, there will still be some excess oil along the bottom of it. And once you get inside the primary, the next thing you want to do is make sure to disconnect the battery, because you don't want there to be any chance that you engage the starter and end up ripping your fingers off. Now that we're inside the primary, you want to remove the retaining ring along with the clutch release plate and the push rod to allow you to get to the clutch hub nut. Now this little plastic step wedge comes in real handy anytime you need to remove the clutch hub nut or the compensating sprocket. Now remember, your clutch hub nut's going to be a left-handed thread, so if you try to lefty-loosey this, you're really going to piss yourself off and not get very far at all. Then you can just grab a hold of the clutch shell and spin it the other way so you can get that little step wedge tool out. And you're going to do the same thing to the compensating sprocket, except for the compensating sprocket is a right-handed thread, so you will spin it to the left to loosen it. And it's a very good idea when taking anything apart that you keep all the parts together in the order you took them off, so you know exactly how they went back on, and there's less likely of a chance that you will lose anything. And next, you have to take the compensating sprocket and clutch hub off as an assembly with the chain left on, and you want to keep it wrapped up nice and neat so you don't lose anything and you know the orientation of the primary chain. Now you want to knock the tab down on the jackshaft lock washer in order to remove the jackshaft bolt. And using a pair of pliers, grab a hold of the starter drive gear in order to remove that jackshaft bolt. Make sure you don't let the teeth slip on that starter drive gear, or you risk gouging or chipping those teeth. Then remove the whole jackshaft as an assembly. Next, we're going to remove the pipes because they get in the way of just about everything we're going to take apart. And you will have to remove the oil tank, and you want to make sure to drain the oil first, or else you will make one hell of a mess. And once you have everything disconnected from the oil tank, carefully take it out of the side of the bike so you don't bang it on anything or scratch anything up. And now that the oil tank's out of the way, we can remove the two starter bolts to free the starter from the inner primary. And you want to make sure all wires or connectors are removed from the starter before you start pulling and tugging on it. And once those starter bolts are removed, the thing should just slide right out for you. And you want to bend down all the lock tabs on the inner primary bolts. And once you got all those lock tabs bent down, you can go ahead then and loosen those bolts, and that'll let you get that inner primary off. Now that you can get to it, you can remove your shifter arm from your tranny and move it and the shift linkage out of the way. Now next, we got to remove both passenger pegs so we can get at the swing arm pivot bolt. And now go ahead and remove the 3 bolts from the clutch release cover so you can go ahead and get that cover out of the way. And now you can remove the swing arm pivot bolt, which also acts as a rear transmission mount. And then a little bit at a time, loosen all 4 of the front transmission mounts that connect to the motor. And once it's loose, you can remove the belt from there, and then you're ready to remove the transmission. And as you're putting the new transmission in, you just want to put it in the same way you took the old one out and angle the back down. It's going to be a tight fit between the engine and the face of the transmission, but you just kind of wiggle it in place. Just be careful not to scratch or gouge anything. And slide your belt back on there, and then you're ready to line everything up and slide your swing arm pivot bolt back into place. Once you got that in there, it lines everything up so you can install the front transmission mounts and tighten everything down how it should be. And as you're putting the ball and ramp assembly together to be installed in the clutch release cover, you want to make sure to coat both sides of that assembly with a heavy layer of grease. It's a high friction area, so no amount of grease is too much. You want to make sure the ball bearings are greased up. That'll also help those bearings to stay in place as you're putting it together so they don't, try to roll around on you and whatnot. When that's all greased up, ready to go, and slide that bottom part into that cover. And then you got your clutch cable there, and the top part of that assembly is just going to slide over that cable. And it's got a little collar that will slide onto the cable and slide up to the end to stop the top of that ball and ramp assembly from sliding off the cable. Once you get that moved all the way to the end of the cable, then you go ahead and install that down in the cover, put some pressure on it, and just move it a couple times and see if it ramps up like it should. Once that's done, you're ready to put the cover over that ball and ramp assembly, and just make sure you get all the lines or all the holes lined up right. You want to use blue Loctite on these, and just make sure you tighten them all down nice and snug. Once you got those tightened down, then you're ready to put that clutch release cover back onto the bike. You want to make sure you don't damage the seal, so just be real careful when you slide it on there. Again, use some Loctite for these bolts. And just install all three of them loosely, and then go around and tighten them all down. Whenever you're doing any kind of work to your motorcycle that requires you to take apart the entire primary, whether it's changing out your transmission or just changing a belt, you can buy a gasket kit, which comes with everything you need, all the seals, all the gaskets, all the O-rings, everything. And that way, one, you save time, you save money, and you're not worrying about whether you ordered everything you need or you don't get into it and realize you need something else and then it takes a couple days to get it. So whenever we do something where we have to take apart an entire primary, we go with Comedic. They sell a really nice kit, and in my opinion, the best gasket company there is out there. There isn't a better gasket. We've never had one fail. They always work good. So if you want, you can buy them from any of the parts distributors, or even you can get them right through us. Anytime you take your exhaust pipes off, you always want to replace the exhaust gaskets. It's just like an engine gasket. You never want to reuse it. And these gaskets are actually made of a wire mesh, and so when you actually tighten the exhaust down to it, that's what creates the seal. So every time you take the exhaust off, you have to replace it, or else it's not going to seal properly. And getting back to the primary, before you put it back in, you want to make sure you knock out both of the old seals, and before you put the new seals in, you want to coat the aluminum with a grease or an oil, just so you don't damage that rubber when you're putting that seal in. You want to, just kind of hammer it down. Sockets work really good. You just want to make sure it's nice and flush, and then just do the same thing with the other seal. And after you got those two seals put in and everything's buttoned up to the tranny, you're ready to put the inner primary back on. You want to make sure to use brand new lock tabs. You never want to reuse those. And once you got all those just kind of tightened down, you want to go through and make sure you tighten them all down to spec. Make sure you bend the lock tabs up to the bolt heads. And then next, what you want to do is go ahead and put your starter in, and again use some blue Loctite on both of the starter bolts, and make sure that you get both of those bolts snug down and then torqued down to spec. And even though you only do have 2 bolts on the starter, you want to make sure that you tighten them down equally. So you want to tighten one down a little bit and jump over the other one, and just kind of go back and forth until they're torqued down to spec. That way it's nice and evenly torqued. And after that, you want to make sure that you get all your electrical wires or connections that you took off when you removed the starter. You want to make sure that you connect those at this point. Now we're ready to put the oil tank back in, and usually these oil tanks can be a little tricky and give you some problems. Just take your time, take a breath, you'll get it. Just might take a little bit. And then if you want to, go ahead and put that support arm back in, The support arm bolts to the top of the transmission, and it goes up and it bolts to the frame right in front of the oil tank. And it basically turns the engine, transmission, and frame into one piece. And now we're going to go ahead and put the oil lines back in. And these oil lines are really nice. One, they look really good, and two, they're really easy to use. They literally just slide into place and click into place, and that's all you gotta do. No tools involved, nothing. So go ahead and slide those back in and slide the covers up over the clips. Then you want to just kind of go through and make sure that you get all the bolts that you had taken out of the oil tank back into it. Make sure it's all secure, Loctited down, and torqued down to spec. And then we'll move on to putting the primary back together. And you want to start with the jack shaft. And again, using the pliers, you hold that starter gear still while you torque down the bolt. And after you got that torqued down, you're going to install the clutch and the compensating sprocket as one assembly. And once you get that in, you're going to loosely put the compensating sprocket back together just how you took it apart, and loosely put the clutch hub nut in. And remember, the clutch hub nut is a left-handed thread, so you're going to turn it to the left to tighten that. And then get your little step wedge tool that we used before, and make sure you have the right torque. These torques are really important for these two nuts. And then go ahead and torque them down. Remember, clutch hub, turn to the left, and compensating sprocket, turn to the right. And after both of those are tightened down to spec, you're going to want to set the primary chain adjustment. And I always use an opened-in wrench to measure the chain at the top. You just want to rest it against the dowel pin and push up. And you want to get the spec out of your manual. And then we're ready to put the primary cover back on. Make sure you use a brand new gasket, and make sure everything lines up right. The gasket's not being pinched anywhere, and you can go ahead and just put a couple bolts in to hold it as you Loctite the other bolts and go around the whole primary. Then next we're going to go ahead and get the exhaust put back on and buttoned up. And at this point, you just want to make sure that everything you had taken off the bike during this procedure is back on it. Everything's accounted for. Want to make sure everything's tight. Just kind of run through everything that you had done just to double check. You never be too safe. And then you want to make sure you fill the primary back up with fluid. And you want to fill it to where it's just above the bottom of that diaphragm spring on the clutch. And there you go, that's it. Now all you have to do is get your wife to let you actually buy a Baker transmission, but you can tell her you get to save all the money on labor because now you can do it yourself.